Welcome to Twilight Tale, where history's mysteries gently unfold as you drift off into slumber. Tonight, we journey into the forgotten corners of time, uncovering the tale of a mysterious empire that vanished without a trace. As you lay back and relax, let the soothing whispers of history lull you into the realm of dreams. This is The Mysterious Empire That Vanished Without a Trace. Prepare for a peaceful journey through time, right here on Twilight Tale. Evening falls slow and soft out here, the kind of twilight that paints the sky in shades of bruised peach and fading lavender before giving way to the deep, inky canvas of night. Out here, where the world feels ancient and whispers on the wind carry more weight than any printed word, you learn to listen. I've spent more nights than I can count under skies like this, nestled amongst the crumbling stones and the ghosts of walls that once stood proud, chasing a feeling, a question, a mystery that's kept me company for years. Pull up a chair, or just settle back into your bed, and let your mind wander with me across these vast, silent landscapes. For what I want to tell you about isn't just a tale, it's an echo of a world that was, and then, inexplicably, wasn't. Imagine, if you will, not just a city lost to the sands of time, or a forgotten town swallowed by the jungle. No, this was bigger, much, much bigger. What if I told you about an entire empire? An empire vast as a summer sky, rich as a gold mine, and mighty as a mountain range. A civilization that hummed with life, bustled with trade, and reached for the stars with its towers and its wisdom. And then, one day, poof, gone. Not vanished by fire, nor by flood, nor by sword. No cataclysmic event left a scar big enough to explain it. Just gone. Like a candle flame snuffed out by an invisible hand, leaving nothing but the lingering scent of smoke and a cold, empty silence. That, my friend, is the riddle we're going to ponder, wrapped up in the soft blankets of the night. It's the kind of mystery that doesn't scream for attention, but rather settles deep in your bones, a quiet, persistent hum. You see those shadows stretching long across the sand, cast by these ancient, fractured columns, each one a question mark, reaching back through time, asking how and why. You can almost feel it, can't you? The cool breath of a history that refuses to be forgotten, even as its makers are. This feeling isn't a scary gone, mind you, not like the spooky stories told around a campfire. It's more of a what happened here gone, a profound, almost wistful sense of absence. It invites curiosity, not fear, a gentle nudge to wonder about the people who once walked where we now only imagine. This wasn't some small, tucked-away kingdom, barely a blip on the historical radar. Oh no. The civilization we're talking about, let's call it the Sundered Empire for now, because that's what it feels like. Something once whole, now broken into countless pieces of speculation, was an extraordinary tapestry of peoples and cultures. Their reach stretched further than most maps dare to draw, from the forests of whispering pines to sun-baked plains where golden eagles soared, and along rivers that snaked like silver ribbons through fertile valleys. They were innovators, dreamers, builders of wonders that, even in ruin, can still take your breath away. Their scientists charted the stars, their engineers diverted rivers, and their artists carved beauty from the very stone of the earth. Laughter echoed in their market squares, wisdom flowed from their grand academies, and families lived out their lives under the benevolent gaze of their powerful rulers. And then, one day, poof, gone. Not vanished by fire, nor by flood, nor by sword. No cataclysmic event left a scar big enough to explain it. Just gone. Like a candle flame snuffed out by an invisible hand, leaving nothing but the lingering scent of smoke and a cold, empty silence. That, my friend, is the riddle we're going to ponder, wrapped up in the soft blankets of the night. It's the kind of mystery that doesn't scream for attention, but rather settles deep in your bones, a quiet, persistent hum. You see those shadows stretching long across the sand, cast by these ancient, fractured columns, each one a question mark, reaching back through time, asking how and why. You can almost feel it, can't you? The cool breath of a history that refuses to be forgotten, even as its makers are. This feeling isn't a scary gone, mind you, not like the spooky stories told around a campfire. It's more of a what happened here gone, a profound, almost wistful sense of absence. It invites curiosity, not fear, a gentle nudge to wonder about the people who once walked where we now only imagine. This wasn't some small, tucked-away kingdom, barely a blip on the historical radar. Oh no. The civilization we're talking about, let's call it the Sundered Empire for now, because that's what it feels like. Something once whole, now broken into countless pieces of speculation, was an extraordinary tapestry of peoples and cultures. Their reach stretched further than most maps dare to draw, from the forests of whispering pines to sun-baked plains where golden eagles soared, and along rivers that snaked like silver ribbons through fertile valleys. They were innovators, dreamers, builders of wonders that, even in ruin, can still take your breath away. Their scientists charted the stars, their engineers diverted rivers, and their artists carved beauty from the very stone of the earth. Laughter echoed in their market squares, wisdom flowed from their grand academies, and families lived out their lives under the benevolent gaze of their powerful rulers. And yet, there's no record of a final battle, no desperate last stand against an invading horde, no seismic shift that tore their lands asunder. The meticulously kept scrolls simply stopped. The bustling cities simply emptied. It wasn't a collapse, or a conquest, or a migration. It was a cessation, a perfect, profound stillness that fell over an entire way of life. Tonight, as the stars begin to prick through the velvet black above us, we'll begin to explore this great quiet. We'll walk among these spectral ruins, listen to the tales the wind whispers through empty chambers, and let our imaginations paint a picture of a people who thrived, lived, loved, and then, without so much as a goodbye, simply stepped off the stage of history. How does an empire, so grand, so magnificent, simply cease to be? That's the question that glows like a distant hearth fire in the darkness, inviting us closer. And perhaps, if we listen carefully enough, we might just hear an echo from that lost world, drifting back to us through the long, quiet corridors of time. Now, pull up a chair, or maybe just snuggle down a little deeper under your quilt, because we're about to drift back through the long, quiet corridors of time. We're going to let that distant hearth fire glow a little brighter in our minds as we step across the threshold from the silent present into the vibrant past of Aethelgard. Forget for a moment those lonely ruins and that profound stillness. Tonight, we're going to paint a picture, stroke by vivid stroke, of what was. Imagine, if you will, a land cradled by ancient, gnarled mountains that seemed to touch the very belly of the sky. But these weren't barren peaks, no sir. These were mountains alive, embraced by the ingenuity and spirit of a people unlike any other. This was Aethelgard at its golden zenith, a sprawling marvel of human endeavor and natural harmony, a place so utterly magnificent it felt like a whisper from the gods themselves. Their cities weren't just built on the land, they were part of it. Picture vast, sun-drenched, terraced metropolises carved right into the mountainsides. Not just rough-hewn caves, mind you, but grand, sweeping architectural wonders. Imagine the sun at dawn, glinting off thousands of polished stone facades, intricate carvings telling stories of heroes and harvests, wisdom and wonder. Staircases, wide and majestic, spiraled up cliffs, connecting neighborhoods that seemed to hang suspended between earth and sky. And everywhere you looked, was green. Ethelgard was famed for its sky gardens, not just pots on balconies, no. These were entire ecosystems, vast botanical wonders, cultivated on colossal platforms that floated gently above the lower city districts, tethered by unseen forces. They weren't just for show either. These gardens fed the people, producing fruits and grains in such abundance that famine was a forgotten word. Imagine walking beneath them, the dapple sunlight filtering through a canopy of exotic leaves, the scent of 1,000 different blossoms drifting down like a sweet, fragrant rain. The hum of specialized insects brought in to pollinate and thrive was a constant, soothing symphony. Their music, folks say, was something to behold, not the boisterous tunes of a bustling market, but intricate, harmonious melodies played on instruments crafted from resonant crystal and fine woods. It was music that didn't just entertain, it elevated. You'd hear it drifting from open courtyards at dusk, mingling with the soft murmur of fountains and the gentle rustle of leaves in the sky gardens, creating an atmosphere of profound peace. Even their marketplace, while vibrant with trade, possessed a calm, respectful energy. Merchants bartered fairly, craftsmen displayed their intricate works, jewelry spun from luminescent minerals, textiles woven with threads that seemed to shimmer with an inner light, tools of impossible precision, all with a shared sense of community and mutual appreciation. Children would play in open squares, their laughter echoing against the smooth, cool stone, learning lessons not just from books, but from the elders who shared stories of their ancestors, tales of how their great civilization had risen from humble beginnings, always stressing harmony with nature and each other. They believed in balance, in a delicate equilibrium between progress and tradition, innovation and respect for the old ways. Their very existence was a testament to the idea that humanity could achieve greatness without sacrificing grace. This was a civilization that saw itself as eternal. They built not for a generation, but for millennia. Their structures were designed to withstand the ravages of time and the whims of the elements. Their wisdom was passed down, refined, and cherished. They were masters of their environment, not their conquerors. They lived in profound harmony, seemingly unburdened by the strife and discord that plagued so many other nascent empires of their time. They were, in every sense of the word, a perfected society. And that, my friends, is what makes their vanishing such a profound, lingering ache in the heart of history. How could such a monument to human potential, a civilization so deeply rooted, so brilliantly cultivated, so utterly vibrant and alive, simply cease to be? How does an entire song simply stop mid-melody? That perfect, profound stillness we talked about, the one that swallowed their grand cities and hushed their bustling life, seems even more impossible now, doesn't it? As if the very breath of a thriving world was simply held and never let out again. The echo we seek, the one whispering from those quiet corridors of time, carries the weight of all that vanished splendor. And as the stars continue their silent march across the sky, leaving us here in the comfortable quiet, we're left to wonder about that perfect, shining world, and what, if anything, could have stolen it away. We left off marveling at Ethelgard, didn't we? That glorious, vibrant tapestry of life, woven with threads of ingenuity and joy, stretching across fertile lands and kissing the sky with its towering spires. It was a civilization humming with purpose, a grand symphony played by a million talented hands. The very thought of it vanishing, simply ceasing its melody, felt like a cruel trick of time. But even the grandest symphonies can have a subtle dissonance creep in, a tiny, almost imperceptible shift in pitch that, at first, merely adds a curious note to the otherwise perfect harmony. And so it was with Ethelgard. For a long, long time, their world was as predictable and comforting as the turning of the seasons. Farmers knew when to sow and when to reap, scholars charted the stars with unwavering precision, and the rhythms of life were as steady as a heartbeat. But then, almost like a secret shared only with the wind, the first tiny irregularities began to surface. Nothing that caused alarm, mind you, not at first. Just soft shifts in the familiar, like finding a misplaced button on your favorite coat. It started, as many strange things do, with nature herself. Old Ilara, who tended the communal herb gardens just outside the city walls, was the first to truly notice. One brisk morning, late into the season, when the last of the autumn leaves had already surrendered their vibrant hues, she knelt by a patch of earth thought long dormant, and there, pushing through the chill-kissed soil, was a perfect cluster of summer lily bells. Not hardy winter blossoms, not the stubborn late bloomers, but the delicate, sun-loving lilies of high summer, their petals unfurling in defiance of the biting air. Ilara, a woman who knew every root and stem by heart, just blinked. It was beautiful, certainly, a tiny miracle, but wrong, like a whispered secret in a silent room. Then came other such curiosities. A young boy, chasing a wayward kite near the Whispering Falls, swore he saw a patch of sky-blue crocuses, the very harbingers of spring, blooming beneath a light dusting of midwinter snow. His mother just smiled, attributing it to a child's overactive imagination. Yet a seed of wonder and a sliver of unease was planted in her own heart. Soon, it became almost a game among the villagers, pointing out these floral anomalies. A solitary rose, perfect and crimson, blooming on a bush barren of leaves in the coldest part of winter. A patch of glowing moss in a sun-drenched meadow. Each instance was dismissed as a fluke, a particularly stubborn plant, a testament to the land's bounty. But deep down, these small, beautiful rebellions against the natural order left a faint, lingering question mark in the air. And then the sounds began. Soft at first, carried on the gentle breezes that swept through the empty valleys just beyond the farming lands. Shepherds, often alone with their flocks for days, were the first to speak of them. Faint, ethereal melodies, like no instrument they'd ever heard, drifting from places where no one lived. Not the joyful pipes of a traveling bard, nor the solemn chanting of the temple priests. These were sounds that seemed to weep and soar, hum and whisper all at once. Sometimes they sounded like a choir of unseen voices singing in a language no one recognized, a melody that both soothed and unsettled. Other times, it was a single, long, drawn-out note, vibrating through the very air, leaving an echo in the listener's bones. People would pause, cup an ear, and then shrug. Just the wind playing tricks, they'd say. But their eyes would dart nervously towards the distant hills. And if the senses of sight and sound were playing these gentle tricks, the very fabric of their world sometimes seemed to shimmer. It was almost impossible to catch, a blink-and-you-miss-it phenomenon. A polished stone on a windowsill, reflecting the moonlight, would sometimes gleam with an unnatural intensity, a light that seemed to pulse from within it for a fleeting second before returning to normal. A drop of morning dew on a spider silk, already a marvel, would occasionally sparkle with the colors of a rainbow, but a rainbow that felt somehow too bright, too perfect, almost digital in its clarity. Young lovers strolling by the river would swear they saw the water briefly turn a shade of iridescent blue, or that the old stone bridge seemed to hum with a faint internal light, only for the effect to vanish the moment they tried to point it out. Nobody truly worried, not yet. How could they? Ethelgard was too strong, too self-assured, too blessed. These were just charming oddities, beautiful coincidences, delightful quirks of a bountiful land. A poet might even weave them into verse. A child might ask endless questions. But the elders, the keepers of knowledge, simply cataloged them as unexplained phenomenon. The empire continued to thrive, its markets bustling, its scholars debating, its artists creating. But beneath the surface, beneath the comfortable hum of their daily lives, the whispers had begun. Not shouts of warning, not booming pronouncements of doom, but soft, persistent murmurs. Hints of a world beginning to stretch, to bend, to breathe in ways it never had before. And as those subtle shifts rippled through their golden age, the grand symphony, still playing strong, had picked up its first quiet, enigmatic note of change. And then the sounds began. Soft at first, carried on the gentle breezes that swept through the empty valleys just beyond the farming lands. Shepherds, often alone with their flocks for days, were the first to speak of them. Faint, ethereal melodies, like no instrument they'd ever heard, drifting from places where no one lived. Not the joyful pipes of a traveling bard, nor the solemn chanting of the temple priests. These were sounds that seemed to weep and soar, hum and whisper all at once. Sometimes they sounded like a choir of unseen voices singing in a language no one recognized, a melody that both soothed and unsettled. Other times, it was a single, long, drawn-out note, vibrating through the very air, leaving an echo in the listener's bones. People would pause, cup and hear, and then shrug. Just the wind playing tricks, they'd say, but their eyes would dart nervously towards the distant hills. And if the senses of sight and sound were playing these gentle tricks, the very fabric of their world sometimes seemed to shimmer. It was almost impossible to catch, a blink-and-you-miss-it phenomenon. A polished stone on a windowsill, reflecting the moonlight, would sometimes gleam with an unnatural intensity, a light that seemed to pulse from within it for a fleeting second before returning to normal. Young lovers strolling by the river would swear the water briefly turned a shade of iridescent blue, or that the old stone bridge seemed to hum with a faint internal light, only for the effect to vanish the moment they tried to point it out. Nobody truly worried. Not yet. How could they? Ethelgard was too strong, too self-assured, too blessed. These were just charming oddities, beautiful coincidences, delightful quirks of a bountiful land. A poet might even weave them into verse. A child might ask endless questions. But the elders, the keepers of knowledge, simply cataloged them as unexplained phenomenon. The empire continued to thrive, its markets bustling, its scholars debating, its artists creating. But beneath the surface, beneath the comfortable hum of their daily lives, the whispers had begun. Not shouts of warning, not booming pronouncements of doom, but soft, persistent murmurs. Hints of a world beginning to stretch, to bend, to breathe in ways it never had before. And as those subtle shifts rippled through their golden age, the grand symphony, still playing strong, had picked up its first quiet, enigmatic note of change. Now, those whispers, the ones that ripple just beneath the surface, telling tales of peculiar light and stones that hummed, they were like the first rustle of leaves before a real wind starts to blow. They were unsettling, sure, but easy enough to dismiss as the colorful chatter of a vibrant world. Ethelgard, people would say, puffing out their chests with pride, she's a land of wonders. And they weren't wrong, not yet. The markets still bustled, the scholars still debated, and the artists, well, they were still weaving and sculpting, pouring their hearts into beauty. But then, that enigmatic note of change, so quiet before, began to crescendo, just a little. Not a blare, mind you, but more like a single clear bell tolling in a fog. The subtle shifts, the charming oddities, they started to take on a harder, colder edge. They went from being fascinating quirks to something else entirely. Something that made folks look at each other with a new kind of question in their eyes. It began, as these things often do, with the everyday. Take Ilara, for instance. Elara was a master weaver, known across Aethelgard for tapestries so lifelike you could almost feel the wind in the depicted trees. Every morning, without fail, you'd hear the rhythmic click-clack of her loom starting up just as the sun kissed the eastern peaks. Her apprentice, a diligent young fellow named Finn, would arrive an hour later to find her already deep in her work, a warm cup of herbal tea steaming beside her, the air fragrant with dyed wool. One Tuesday morning, a morning much like any other, Finn arrived. He pushed open the creaky door to Elara's workshop, expecting the familiar symphony of the loom. But there was only silence. The workshop was empty. The morning sun streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, but no Elara. Her teacup sat on the small table, still warm, with a half-eaten pastry beside it. On the loom, a glorious half-finished tapestry depicting a soaring griffin lay exactly as she'd left it the evening before, a shuttle still nestled amongst the threads. Her favorite shawl was draped over her chair. Everything was in its place, pristine and undisturbed, save for the most important thing, Elara herself. Finn waited, then called out, "Mistress Elara?" He checked her small living quarters attached to the workshop. Her bed was neatly made, a book open on her bedside table. No sign. He went to her neighbors, his brow furrowed with confusion. Nobody had seen her leave. Nobody had heard a sound. It was as if the very air had simply swallowed her whole. A week later, the same eerie pattern repeated itself, this time with a renowned sculptor named Kale. Kale carved colossal figures out of local marble, bringing stone to life with a craftsman's touch that was legendary. Every evening, he'd tidy his tools, cover his unfinished work with a canvas cloth, and then head to the village square for his customary ale and a game of riddles. He was a creature of habit, as reliable as the dawn. One Wednesday morning, his assistant, Lyra, arrived to start preparing the next block of marble. The workshop door stood slightly ajar, which was unusual. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of fragrant wood shavings and fresh marble dust. Kale's chisels lay neatly arranged on his workbench. His half-finished masterpiece, a proud warrior with an outstretched arm, stood majestic beneath its canvas covering. The canvas was still in place, undisturbed, but Kale, gone. His mug from the previous night's herbal tea sat on a small table, clean and put away. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, not a single misplaced pebble or a disturbed tool. Just absence, a grand, echoing absence. These weren't isolated incidents, not for long. Soon, a celebrated potter, known for her vibrant glazes, failed to appear one morning. Then a famed scribe, whose meticulous records formed the backbone of the empire. Each time, the story was the same. The tools of their trade laid out, a half-finished project awaiting their return, a warm hearth, perhaps, or an unmade bed. But the person, the vital spark that made the workshop alive, was simply gone. At first, folks told themselves tall tales. Perhaps Elara went on a sudden pilgrimage. Maybe Kale finally finished his warrior and ascended to the heavens with it. They laughed, a little too loud, a little too long. But as the disappearances mounted, as the chairs at the evening ale hall stood empty, and the click-clack of familiar looms fell silent, the laughter died. Puzzlement turned to worry, and worry, in its quiet way, began to curdle into a deeper, unspoken fear. The elders, who once catalogued the oddities with a shrug and a smile, now gathered in hushed tones. They sent out search parties, ranging far into the gentle hills and along the silver rivers, but found nothing. No footprints, no discarded cloaks, not a single trace, not even a whisper caught on the wind. It was as if these cherished souls, the very heart and hands of Aethelgard's artistry, had simply stepped out of existence, leaving behind only the ghost of their routines and the chilling question of where they had gone. The golden age of Æthelgard, still shining bright on the surface, had begun to feel a shadow lengthen across its brilliant face, and the quiet, enigmatic notes of change had finally found their way into the very heartbeats of its people. Now, if you'd been in Æthelgard during its heyday, you'd have known Eldora. Not because it was the capital, mind you, but because it was the very pulse of the Empire's trade. Imagine a heartbeat, strong and steady, filled with the thrum of 1,000 conversations, the clatter of carts, the ringing of a blacksmith's hammer, and the distant, cheerful bleating of sheep heading to market. Eldora was that heartbeat, a city built on crossroads, where merchants from distant lands mingled with local artisans, all under a sky that seemed to hum with commerce. Its markets were legendary, a kaleidoscope of colors and sounds, a symphony of haggling and laughter. You could find anything there, from silks spun on faraway looms to spices that tasted of sun and adventure, from intricate Æthelgardian jewelry to stout barrels of ale brewed right in the city's heart. The inns boasted roaring fires and boisterous songs, their patrons swapping tales that stretched the truth like taffy on a hot day, their bellies full, their spirits high. Eldora was alive, a place that never truly slept, where the scent of baking bread mixed with exotic incense, and the promise of a good bargain hung in the air like a sweet perfume. But as our story takes a turn, even the most vibrant heart can fall silent. It was Elias, a caravan master with more weathered lines on his face than years in his life, who first noticed something amiss. He'd been traveling the road to Eldora for 40 years, knew every bump and dip, every shortcut, and every treacherous bend. His caravan, laden with fine Æthelgardian tapestries and meticulously crafted silverwork, was on its usual route, making good time. Behind him rode Finn, a young guard barely old enough to shave, whose eyes still held the innocent wonder of youth, though even his had begun to cloud with the strange tales drifting from Æthelgard about vanished artisans. As they drew closer to Eldora, Elias's brow furrowed. The usual clamor, the distant murmur that always announced the city long before its walls came into view, simply wasn't there. The air, usually thick with the faint scent of wood smoke and human endeavor, now carried only the clean, crisp smell of pine and damp earth. Odd, Elias grumbled, pulling his reins tighter. The wind must be blowing the wrong way. But the wind, it seemed, was blowing exactly as it always did. The silence, however, was steadfast. It grew with every mile, pressing in on them. Not a peaceful quiet, but a profound, almost aggressive absence of sound that made the hairs on Finn's neck prickle. When they reached the great oak gates of Eldora, usually guarded by stern-faced sentinels and bustling with traffic, they found them wide open, creaking faintly in the gentle breeze, as if patiently waiting for someone who never arrived. No guards, no porters, just the gaping maw of the city, utterly still. Elias, a man whose gut had saved him from more than one bandit ambush, felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He motioned his caravan to halt, then dismounted, his boots making an unnervingly loud crunch on the gravel road. "Finn," he whispered, his voice hushed, "stay with the wagons. I'm going in." Finn, pale as winter snow, shook his head. "No, Master Elias, let me come with you." With a nod, Elias drew his short sword, its familiar weight a small comfort, and together they stepped into Eldora. The main thoroughfare, usually a river of humanity, was deserted. Sun-dappled cobblestones lay bare. Merchant stalls stood open, their wares, bolts of cloth, baskets of ripe apples, clay pots, even a gleaming stack of freshly baked bread, untouched, as if their owners had just stepped away for a moment, but no one returned. They walked deeper, their footsteps echoing like thunder in the unnatural stillness. The blacksmith's forge was cold, the tools laid neatly beside the anvil, a half-finished sword gleaming dully. The scent of last night's roasted lamb still lingered faintly outside the Golden Flagon Inn, its heavy oak door ajar, revealing empty tables and cold hearths. A child's wooden toy lay forgotten in the middle of a winding alleyway, a small, bright splash of color against the gray stone. Laundry, freshly washed, still hung on lines between houses, swaying gently like silent flags of surrender. Not a single dog barked, not a single cat meowed, no bird sang from the eaves. The hum of the city, that constant, reassuring thrum of life, had been utterly, completely extinguished. Elias stopped in the central marketplace, his eyes scanning the panorama of silent shops and empty streets. The bustling square, once the vibrant heart of the city, felt like a stage after the show had packed up and left, leaving behind only props and the ghost of an audience. There were no signs of struggle, no overturned carts, no scattered coins, no blood. It was as if every man, woman, and child in Eldora had simply evaporated. They hadn't fled. Their goods, their homes, their very routines were left in suspended animation. They had simply ceased to be there. Finn let out a shaky breath, his young face a mask of bewildered terror. "Master Elias," he whispered, "where did everyone go?" Elias, the seasoned traveler, the man who had seen wonders and terrors alike, had no answer. He stood there, and the silent city of Eldora, the weight of the inexplicable pressing down on him, heavier than any cargo his caravan had ever carried. The disappearances in Ethelgard had been a chill wind. This was a blizzard, an entire city gone, without a trace, leaving behind only the cold, hard fact of its absence. The Golden Age, once so brilliant, was now staring into an abyss of shadow and profound, unsettling quiet, and Elias, for the first time in his long life, felt a fear that went deeper than anything he'd ever known, a fear not of what might come, but of what had already, impossibly, been. The silence of Eldoria pressed in on Elias and Finn, a heavy shroud woven from absence. Finn's question, "Where did everyone go?" hung in the air, a desperate echo with no answer, slowly fading into the profound stillness. Elias, usually so grounded, felt the solid earth beneath his feet dissolving into something less certain, less real. This wasn't just a chill wind anymore. It was the arctic breath of a truth too vast, too impossible to comprehend. He remembered the earlier disappearances in Ethelgard, isolated homes, a scattered village here and there. He'd dismissed them, like most sensible folks, as banditry, perhaps a plague that moved fast and left no bodies. But an entire city? The sheer scale of it snapped something in his mind, like a taut bowstring finally giving way. In that broken moment, amidst the haunting stillness of Eldoria, a memory, half buried under years of pragmatic travel and trade, clawed its way to the surface. It was a memory of an audience long ago in the gilded halls of Emperor Theon's palace in the capital city, Altair. He'd been a young man then, hardly more than a boy, accompanying his father on a trade mission, eager to make his mark in the world of caravans and coin. But the court had been abuzz, not with talk of commerce or treaties, but with whispers about the Oracle of Altair. The Oracle wasn't some back-alley fortune-teller, mind you. She was the Empire's seer, revered and feared in equal measure, a woman whose visions had guided emperors for centuries. Her chamber was deep within the palace, a place where the sun never truly touched, lit by flickering oil lamps that cast long, dancing shadows. Young Elias had found himself swept along, a wide-eyed observer, as his father, a man of some standing, was granted a rare seat among the minor nobility present. The air in the chamber had been thick, heavy with incense and the unspoken anxieties of those gathered. The oracle herself sat upon a simple stone throne, shrouded in dark cloth, her face mostly obscured. Only her hands, gnarled and ancient like roots of an old oak, were visible, resting on knees that seemed to hold the weight of forgotten ages. Then she'd begun to speak. Her voice, ancient and raspy like dry leaves skittering across cobblestones, filled the cavernous space. It wasn't loud, but it resonated with a strange power that settled deep in your bones. "A veil descends," she'd whispered, her sightless eyes, even through the shadow of her hood, seeming to pierce through the very fabric of reality itself. "It will fall not with thunder, nor with earthquake, but with a breath held, a whisper unheard. Then will come the song of silence, a harmony of absence, where laughter once played and life once thrummed." A nervous cough had broken the tension from a nobleman near the back, followed by the rustle of silk as others shifted uneasily. Emperor Theon, a man of logic and empire building, strong and proud, had tried to put on a brave face, his voice booming a little too loudly in the hushed chamber. "A veil, Oracle, a metaphor for hard times, perhaps, a coming famine, or a barbarian incursion from the northern wastes." He was a man who believed in problems that could be solved with steel, grain, or a well-placed diplomatic word. But the oracle had simply shaken her head, a slow, deliberate motion that carried more weight than any imperial decree. "No, your majesty, no famine that food can mend, no foe that steel can repel. This is a fading, a quiet departure. The loom of reality will find its threads cut, one by one, until the tapestry is but a whisper in the wind. And the greatest unraveling of all, the unwinding of what makes us, what holds us to our stories, our very existence, time unwoven." Her voice had dropped to an almost imperceptible murmur then, like sand sifting through fingers, but her words had etched themselves into Elias's young mind. And when it is done, the world will remember only the echo of a dream, a shadow of what once was, a story whispered but never truly known. The emperor had tried to dismiss it, of course, attributing it to the oracle's advancing age, perhaps a touch of poetic license. The court, eager to please, had followed suit, trading nervous chuckles and talking of omens and portents in the abstract. Young Elias, a pragmatist even then, had found it chilling, but ultimately an enigma to be filed away with other curious tales. The sun had still shined brightly, the markets had bustled, and the empire had felt as solid as the mountains that guarded its borders. Now, standing in the hollow shell of Eldoria, amidst the unmade beds and half-eaten meals, with dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight that pierced the uncurtained windows of empty homes, the chilling truth of her prophecy struck him with the force of a battering ram. A veil descends. Had it not descended upon Ethelgard, snatching away lives without a sound, and now upon Eldoria? A song of silence. What else was this profound quiet that deafened the world, this total absence of human sound, save their own ragged breaths? Time unwoven. He looked at a child's wooden horse, left mid-play, a tiny handprint still visible in the dusk nearby, as if the very moment had simply ceased, not stopped, but unwoven from the flow of existence itself. His heart hammered against his ribs, not with the immediate terror of discovery, but with a deeper, colder dread. The empire hadn't just vanished, it had been warned, and the warning hadn't been understood. The oracle hadn't spoken of destruction, but of absence, of things simply ceasing to be, like a breath taken but never exhaled. Elias, the seasoned traveler, the man of logistics, now faced a foe that defies all logic, all understanding. He clutched Finn's shoulder, his voice hoarse, a tremor running through him that had nothing to do with the cool Eldorian air. "Finn," he managed, the words catching in his throat. We have to find out what she meant. We have to understand what it is that unwaves time. The Golden Age, once so brilliant, was not merely staring into an abyss of shadow and profound, unsettling quiet. It had been told the abyss was coming. And Elias, for the first time in his long life, felt a purpose rising through the fear, to unravel the greatest mystery his world had ever faced, before the veil descended on everything. Elias's grip on Finn's shoulder tightened, a silent anchor against a world that felt like it was slipping. The seer's words, "unweaves time," echoed in the chambers of his mind, cold and sharp. This wasn't just a decay, not a slow crumble into dust. This was an active undoing, a thread pulled from the fabric of existence itself. His purpose, once a fragile flicker in the face of overwhelming dread, now burned with a fierce, desperate urgency. They had to find answers, and fast. Their journey led them not through forgotten ruins, but into the hushed, cavernous libraries of Eldoria's capital, places where knowledge was stacked higher than mountains. The city itself, once bustling, now held its breath, a quiet anxiety settling over its grand plazas and shadowed archways. It felt as if the very air had thinned, carrying whispers of things no longer there. Elias, with Finn trailing close, navigated the labyrinthine corridors, seeking out the oldest, most guarded archives, driven by a hunch that the Empire's wisest minds must have noticed the creeping emptiness long before it reached the common folk. They found them, not in the main halls, but tucked away in a seldom-used annex, a chamber where the very parchment seemed to hum with forgotten energy. Here, amidst towering shelves groaning under the weight of ancient scrolls and meticulously bound tomes, lay the last, desperate efforts of Eldoria's most brilliant scholars. Elias recognized the elegant script of the Imperial Chroniclers, a guild renowned for their unwavering dedication to truth, their meticulous records spanning centuries of Eldorian history. But these weren't histories of grand conquests or philosophical debates. These were frantic, almost feverish entries, penned with a trembling hand that belied the scholar's usual stoicism. They were titled, ominously, "The Unraveling." Finn, ever quick to grasp the patterns, pointed to the earliest entries. "Look, Elias, they speak of the sky." Elias leaned closer, his fingers tracing the delicate script. The scholars had noted peculiar atmospheric shifts, subtle at first, then increasingly alarming. The sky began to bleed at twilight, one entry read, not with the usual hues of dusk, but with a strange, bruised purple that seemed to drain the warmth from the air. Another spoke of clouds that formed and dissipated with unnatural speed, like thoughts erased from a troubled mind. Then came the true horror. Stars, another passage lamented, stars that did not align. Constellations shifted their ancient dance, or simply vanished. The celestial map, once our unchanging guide, now mocked us with its incompleteness. Finn gasped, pointing to a particularly haunting illustration, a meticulously drawn star chart, but with vast, empty spaces where familiar patterns should have shown. It was like looking at a beloved face, only to find the eyes missing. As they delved deeper, the descriptions grew more unsettling, painting a chilling picture of an empire under siege by an invisible, inexplicable force. The scholars meticulously documented an increasing sense of absence. It began with minor things, the scent of a particular flower that suddenly wasn't there, the faint echo of a distant bell that no longer rang, the memory of a childhood street that no longer quite matched the present reality. Then it escalated. The river Sinos, one scholar's scrawl detailed, its murmuring waters, its very sound, is less today than yesterday. A quiet descends upon us, not of peace, but of profound, unsettling void. They wrote of how artisans would begin a craft, only to find a crucial tool or a specific pigment simply gone from their hands, without a tremor or a drop. of musicians who'd strike a note only for the echo to fail, dying abruptly, as if swallowed. Even the memories themselves seemed to be under attack. We find ourselves, a chilling passage read, struggling to recall the faces of our own ancestors, as if the past itself is thinning, becoming transparent. The fear emanating from these pages was palpable, almost suffocating. Elias imagined these weary scholars, their eyes burning with exhaustion and a dawning terror, hunched over their desks, desperately trying to record the world as it slipped through their fingers. They were historians, documenting the erasure of history. The final entries were barely legible, a hurried, desperate scramble against an impending end. The handwriting was erratic, smeared with what looked like tears or hurried ink blots. The last, incomplete chronicle was penned by the head chronicler himself, a man named Master Ilara. His final words trailed off, a testament to the abruptness of whatever befell them. "The air is thin, impossibly thin," Ilara had scrawled. "The light, it doesn't illuminate as it once did. The edges of things, they soften, blur, then simply cease. There is a drawing in, like a great breath taken, but never." The sentence broke off there, unfinished, a stark monument to the silence that had swallowed Eldoria. The parchment was stained, as if the pen had dropped suddenly, forever sealing the last observation. Elias stared at the incomplete sentence, the words echoing the seer's ominous warning. "The drawing in," he whispered, the phrase heavy with cosmic dread. It wasn't an explosion, not a cataclysm of fire and fury. It was a retraction, a subtle yet absolute retraction of existence itself. He looked at Finn, his expression grim. They understood it was happening, Finn. They documented it, but they couldn't stop it. And this drawing in, it's the key. We have to find out what it truly meant, and what happened right after that final entry was made. The scholar's work ends here, but ours, he gestured to the vast empty library, ours has just truly begun. The silence of the archives pressed in on them, heavier now, laden with the weight of a vanished empire. Elias felt a cold dread, but also a renewed surge of determination. The chronicles had given them a terrifying glimpse into the mechanics of the void, but they hadn't revealed its source. That, he knew, was their next perilous quest. The silence of the archive, a weight on Elias's shoulders, heavy as a forgotten tombstone, wasn't just the absence of sound anymore. It was the presence of a profound, impossible emptiness, pressing in on him from every shadowed alcove, every dusty scroll. Finn stood beside him, shoulders hunched, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a quiet dread. The drawing in, the scholar's chilling term for the subtle, insidious retraction of existence itself, had given them the why of the disappearance, or at least a terrifying glimpse into its mechanism, but not the how it played out for those living through it. "They charted it," Elias murmured, his voice rough against the stillness. "Documented the very process of their own unmaking. But what did it look like, Finn, when it truly took hold?" Finn pointed a shaky finger at a series of larger, more durable slate tablets Elias had overlooked, tucked away in a specialized fire-resistant compartment. These seemed to be public records, census counts, trade tallies, village rosters. Elias nodded, his heart thumping a slow, heavy rhythm. He pulled them out, one after another, their surfaces cool and smooth beneath his fingertips. What unfolded on those tablets, in stark, meticulous figures, was far more terrifying than any battle chronicle. It wasn't a roar, you see, not a tremor that shook the foundations of the world. There was no cataclysmic fire, no sweeping flood, no marauding horde leaving ruins in their wake. This was a different kind of ending, one that snuck up like a thief in the night, silent and utterly, devastatingly complete. Imagine, if you will, a small village nestled by a winding river, smoke curling lazily from thatched roofs, children's laughter echoing through the morning mist. One day, a single family, the Millers perhaps, famed for their sturdy baskets, simply wasn't there. Their cottage stood, untouched, the half-finished baskets still on the workbench, embers still warm in the hearth, but the Millers themselves were gone. No struggle, no sign of forced entry, just a perfect, inexplicable absence. People whispered, wondered, maybe even hoped they'd simply packed up and left, but no one ever saw them go. Then, a few weeks later, another family, the Bakers, known for their sweetbread, vanished. Their loaves, still rising in the kitchen, began to sour. The village felt a chill then, a creeping unease that settled deep in their bones. Elias traced a line of numbers on a tablet detailing the census of the Riverbend hamlet. First, a few households, then entire sections of a community. The scholars marked it here. He indicated a series of decreasing tallies with unsettling precision. Absences confirmed, no trace of departure, dwellings intact. He moved to another set of tablets depicting larger townships. The pattern repeated, only faster, with greater scope. It wasn't chaos, Finn observed, his voice barely a whisper. It was quiet. Insidious, Elias corrected, his gaze distant, envisioning the horror. Like a tide slowly receding, leaving behind a perfectly formed, yet utterly empty landscape. The baker's oven still radiating warmth, the farmer's tools leaning against a gate, the weaver's loom half spun. Everything there, except the people. The capital city, once a vibrant tapestry of life, began to thin. Imagine the grand marketplace, usually a cacophony of hawkers and hagglers, slowly losing its voices, its vibrant hues fading to muted tones, as stalls fully stocked stood unattended. The footsteps on the cobblestones grew fewer. The shouts of children playing in the squares became rare, until only the lonely echo of the wind remained, whistling through empty doorways and across deserted plazas. The mighty royal palace, a sprawling monument of power and prestige, became a hollow shell, its opulent chambers silently preserving the ghost of bustling court life. No battles, no plagues that left bodies, Elias stated, more to himself than Finn. Just an emptying, a drawing in, until there was nothing left to draw. He slammed the last tablet down with a thud that seemed to reverberate through the vanished city outside. This wasn't an escape, Finn. This was a dissolution. They were swallowed whole, leaving their world perfectly preserved, a stage set for actors who simply ceased to be. A cold dread settled deep in Elias's stomach. But these scholars, he continued, looking around the cavernous library, they didn't just document their end, they were seeking the source. The final entries, the drawing in, they were descriptions, not solutions. They wouldn't have just sat here and watched it happen. He began to search with renewed urgency, not for more historical accounts of the vanishing, but for anything that suggested a final, desperate act. A map, a research log, a coded message, a personal journal, anything that pointed to where the scholars, in their final moments, believed the answer lay, or where they made their last, desperate stand against the encroaching void. Their journey, he realized, must now lead them out of the archive and into the quiet, perfectly preserved desolation outside. The sun had climbed high, a relentless orb baking the parched earth of the distant plains, when the lead scout, a wiry fellow named Cale, with eyes like a hawk, raised a hand. "Hold up, Captain," he rasped, his voice dry as the desert dust coating his beard. "Look yonder." Captain Alistair Finch, A man whose face was a roadmap of weathered lines and whose beard held more gray than gold squinted against the glare. They'd been pushing for weeks, a small band of 20, following ancient, half-forgotten maps, and stranger still, whispers from nomadic tribes about a city that sleeps. Most folks back home dismissed it as campfire legend, but Finch had always had a nose for the truth buried beneath the tall tales. His heart, usually a steady drum against his ribs, gave a little flutter. What Cale pointed to wasn't a mirage, though for a moment Finch truly believed it might be. Rising from the horizon, shimmering faintly in the heat haze, was a distinct, almost ethereal outline. Not a natural rock formation, not some trick of light, but something clearly wrought by intelligent hands. As they drew closer, pushing their tired mounts through the scrubland, the mirage solidified into impossible reality. It was a city, not a ruin as they knew ruins, crumbling walls picked clean by wind and time, foundations swallowed by the earth. No, this was a city perfectly, impossibly preserved. Towers of gleaming, unfamiliar stone reached for the sky, their surfaces smooth as polished glass, catching the sun in a way that made them seem almost alive, or perhaps just recently alive. Bridges arced elegantly over unseen waterways, and grand avenues, paved with intricate patterns, stretched out like an invitation. Alistair dismounted, the soft crunch of his boots on the hard earth the only sound beyond the wind's lonely sigh. "Well, I'll be," he murmured, his breath catching in his throat. His crew, a mix of hardened explorers and curious scholars, stood silent beside him, eyes wide, jaws slack. "They said it vanished," he finally whispered, "not that it simply went to sleep." They moved with an almost reverent caution, each step echoing in the oppressive silence. There were no crumbling gates, no broken doors. The city seemed to simply begin. They passed beneath an archway so magnificent it dwarfed their entire caravan, adorned with carvings of a people whose faces held a serene, almost knowing wisdom. No dust motes danced in the air, no debris cluttered the thoroughfares. It was as if the last resident had just stepped inside, moments before they arrived, and simply forgotten to return. The silence was the heaviest thing. It wasn't the silence of a long abandoned place, where the wind whistled through empty windows and creaked old timbers. This was a held breath, a silence that felt pregnant with untold stories, a vast emptiness that hummed with a forgotten presence. They saw magnificent plazas, where fountains stood dry but ready, their intricate carvings of mythical beasts and flowing water untouched. They peered into grand public buildings, where tables were set as if for a meal, and scrolls lay unfurled on pedestals, their writing clear and crisp, untouched by decay. One young scholar, Alara, known for her sharp mind and even sharper wit, walked slowly into a large hall that looked like a place of study. Books lined shelves from floor to ceiling, their bindings pristine. An open volume lay on a lectern, a feather quill resting beside it, as if its owner had just gone for a cup of tea. She reached out a trembling hand, hesitated, then withdrew it. "It's unnatural," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper in the cavernous space. "It's a perfect moment, stretched across centuries." Captain Finch found himself in what appeared to be a grand market, stalls laden with what looked like carved curiosities, fabrics of impossible richness, and tools of unknown purpose. All perfectly arranged, perfectly preserved, yet perfectly still. There wasn't a single footprint in the fine dust on the ground, save for their own. No cobwebs, no signs of animal life, no rust. "Where did everyone go?" one of the men asked. the question hanging in the air, swallowed by the city's vast, eerie quiet. Alistair had no answer. He stood in the heart of Ethelgard, a city frozen not in ice, but in a moment of profound, inexplainable absence. It was a monument to a thriving civilization, caught mid-breath, a grand testament to a people who simply ceased to be. The air was thick with mystery, a presence that wasn't seen but profoundly felt, a lingering whisper of something that was, and then, suddenly, wasn't. They had arrived, but it felt less like discovery and more like an intrusion into a profound, ghostly dream. The weight of centuries of unbroken silence pressed down on them, and Alistair knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that they had not merely found a city, but had stumbled upon the greatest, most beautiful, and most terrifying secret the world had ever known. And the real question wasn't what they would find, but what, in this perfectly preserved desolation, might find them. The air, thin and ancient, seemed to hum, not with sound, but with the profound absence of it. Alistair's boots, along with those of his team, echoed like cannon fire in the Grand Plaza, a rude intrusion upon a silence that had reigned undisturbed for millennia. Here stood Ethelgard, not in ruins, but in a state of suspended animation, a perfect, exquisite ghost. The markets were still laden, though the vibrant hues of silks had muted to ochre and sepia, and bread, long since petrified, sat on merchant stalls as if awaiting a customer who simply stepped away for a moment. Homes stood open, hearths cold but still filled with carefully stacked kindling. A child's wooden toy lay forgotten in a courtyard, a small boat with a broken mast. Everything was in its place, except the people. "It's like they just pressed pause," whispered Dr. Eristhorne, his voice barely audible, as if afraid to shatter the fragile spell. He ran a gloved hand over the smooth, unblemished surface of a workbench in what must have been a jeweler's shop. Tiny, intricate tools lay beside half-finished pendants, glittering faintly even in the dim light filtering through the city's crystalline arches. No sign of struggle, no widespread panic, just gone. His words hung in the vast empty space, a question with no answer. Over generations, long before anyone truly knew Ethelgard existed, such an unthinkable void had given birth to 1,000 whispers, a tapestry of theories woven by the human need to explain the inexplicable. Alistair, standing amidst the eerie beauty, could almost hear them now, carried on the phantom breeze that stirred no dust. Some tales, spun by firelight in distant villages, spoke of a grand departure, not a disaster. They claimed Ethelgard's people, having reached the pinnacle of their understanding, simply chose to transcend. A collective dream, some elders would murmur, a shared consciousness so powerful that they dreamt themselves into a higher plane of existence, leaving their physical realm a perfectly preserved husk. They called it the Great Dreaming, a beautiful, unsettling notion that perhaps reality itself was merely a construct, and Ethelgard had simply woken up from it. Other, more ominous legends painted a different picture. They whispered of a planar shift, a sudden, violent dislocation that tore the very fabric of their reality. One moment, they were here, vibrant and alive, and the next, they slipped sideways, falling into a parallel dimension, a mirror world where perhaps Ethelgard still thrived, utterly oblivious to the void they'd left behind. Or perhaps, worse yet, they existed as spectral reflections, forever yearning for a home they could no longer touch. It was said that on certain nights, if you listened closely enough to the deep earth, you could hear the faint, echoing laughter of children from another world, proof of Ethelgard's ghost. Then there were the darker, more fearful theories, the ones that spoke of a hidden doorway to another dimension, not chosen, but opened. A gateway to something vast and unknowable, something that reached out and simply pulled the entire civilization through. Was it a benevolent entity offering salvation, or something far more ancient and predatory, a cosmic force that saw Eppelgard as little more than a harvest? This was the story that made the hairs on Alistair's neck stand on end, the one that suggested what might find them was not a relic, but a lingering presence, an echo of the thing that took. As the team cautiously explored, their headlamps cutting through the perpetual twilight of the city's interior, each untouched object, each perfectly preserved detail amplified the unsettling enigma. A cup still on a table, half filled with crystalline residue. A broom leaning against a wall as if its owner had just stepped out for a moment. Alistair found himself in what looked like a grand library, shelves filled with scrolls and tablets, yet utterly devoid of dust. He picked up a scroll, its parchment supple, the ink still vibrant. He half expected to hear the rustle of a page being turned, the soft cough of a scholar, but there was nothing, only the persistent, heavy quiet that seemed to press against his eardrums. Alistair, a hushed voice broke the silence. It was Lena, her flashlight beam fixed on a mural in a grand ceremonial hall. It depicted a procession of the Ethelgard people, joyful and vibrant, walking towards a central, swirling vortex of light. It wasn't menacing. It looked like an invitation. But behind the light, barely discernible, were faint, dark tendrils reaching. Look at this. It's almost like a depiction of the vanishing. He walked over, his eyes tracing the intricate lines. The vortex shimmered with an almost unearthly glow, even in stone. It was beautiful, terrifying, and utterly captivating. He felt a strange pull, a dizziness that wasn't from exertion. The air here was colder, subtly different, tinged with a metallic tang he couldn't place. The whispers of the ancients, once abstract theories, began to coalesce, to feel less like speculation and more like distant memories trying to break through. What if, Lena continued, her voice barely a whisper, what if this isn't a place where they vanished from, but a place where they went to? Her beam drifted across the mural, illuminating the dark tendrils more clearly now, subtly shifting in their depiction, almost writhing. And what if, by being here, by standing where they once stood, we're not just looking for answers, but becoming part of the question? What if the door swings both ways? Alistair felt a shiver trace down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. The perfectly preserved city, once a marvel, now felt like a trap. The silence was no longer merely the absence of sound. It was a hungry, waiting presence. And as he looked at the swirling vortex on the mural, and then back at the perfectly intact, utterly empty city around them, he realized that the greatest secret wasn't what had happened to Ethelgard, but what lingered behind, still stirring in the silence, beckoning.
That shiver Alistair felt, I tell you, it wasn't just a fleeting chill. It sank into your bones, settled deep in your chest, and coiled around your thoughts like one of those dark tendrils on the mural. We stood there, frozen in time ourselves, the silent city mirroring our own inability to move, to speak, to even truly comprehend. The air had thickened, not with fog, but with an unspoken question, pressing down on us from every perfectly carved stone. Eventually, the sun began its slow crawl toward the western horizon, painting the strange, untouched architecture in hues of orange and purple, making the shadows long and restless. We didn't find a definitive answer in Ethelgard that day, not one you could write down in a neat historical footnote anyway. No dusty scroll explaining a mass exodus, no grand collapse, no sign of a struggle. Just an emptiness so profound, it felt fuller than any bustling marketplace. We found echoes, certainly, and a sense that the very air hummed with a forgotten story. But the final chapter remained elusive, tucked away in the deepest recesses of time. Leaving Ethelgard was harder than arriving. It felt like we were pulling ourselves free from a magnetic field, a quiet resistance in the very atmosphere. We left with our notebooks crammed with observations, our cameras full of images, and our hearts heavy with the weight of so much unanswered wonder. The questions Alistair had posed about the door swinging both ways, about becoming part of the question ourselves, they stuck to us like burrs, digging in deeper with every mile we put between us and that silent metropolis. And that's the real kicker, isn't it? That Ethelgard, in all its perplexing glory, isn't some long-forgotten ruin covered by sand or jungle. It stands, plain as day, defying logical explanation. Its stone walls still catching the sunlight, its grand plazas still open to the sky. Even today, folks who make the journey, a trek not for the faint of heart, mind you, tell similar tales. They speak of a peculiar stillness that blankets the city, a quiet so profound it swallows your own heartbeat. You can yell, you can clap, but the sound seems to get absorbed, never quite echoing back the way it should. Some say they feel a sense of being watched, not by prying eyes, but by something far more ancient and formless. A soft pressure on the back of the neck, a fleeting shadow just beyond the periphery of vision, a feeling that you're not alone, even in the most utter solitude. It's not frightening in the way a ghost story is meant to scare you outright. It's more unsettling, like realizing you've walked into a room where a conversation just ended and you missed the most important part. Then there's the music. Not everyone hears it, but enough do for it to be more than just imagination. A faint, distant melody, carried on the wind, sometimes just a single soaring note, other times a complex, almost heartbreaking harmony. It's always just beyond reach, like a half-remembered tune from a dream. You strain to hear it clearly, but it fades as quickly as it appears, leaving behind only the profound silence and the ache of yearning. Is it the wind playing tricks through the intricate carvings? Or is it the true echo of lost dreams, a spectral symphony of a people who once lived and loved and built wonders? I've been back a few times since that first journey with Alistair. Each time, the mystery only deepens, like a well that never quite reaches its bottom. Ethelgard doesn't give up its secrets easily, if it gives them up at all. It just is, a monument to a people who mastered something we can only glimpse in our wild imaginations, and then vanished, without a trace, leaving behind only the echoes and the questions still stirring in the silence, beckoning anyone brave enough to listen and wonder. It's a city that hasn't just gone quiet, it's a city that has become the quiet itself, a beautiful, haunting silence that remembers everything but tells nothing. And once you've felt it, once you've heard that whisper of a lost song, it gets a hold of you, and it never truly lets go. Ethelgard. Even saying its name out loud now, here in the quiet of a different evening, stirs something deep down, like the last embers of a campfire long since burned out, still glowing with phantom heat. It's been years since that first trek with Alistair, and more years still since my last return to those silent, enigmatic ruins. The dust of Ethelgard, I reckon, has settled into the very fabric of my being, woven into the stories I tell, the way I look at the world, and certainly the way I look at the stars on a clear, dark night. It never truly lets go, just as I said. It just changes its grip. At first, the questions were a torment, a restless itch I couldn't scratch. Who were they? Why did they leave? What power did they wield that could simply unmake an entire civilization? I spent countless hours poring over maps, cross-referencing ancient texts that barely mentioned anything remotely similar, even sketching out the strange symbols I'd seen etched into the stones. But Ethelgard isn't a puzzle box designed to be opened. It's more like a vast, ancient dream, one you can walk through, touch, and feel the cold reality of, but never truly wake up from with all the answers neatly filed away. And somewhere along the line, the need to know every single particular began to fade, replaced by something far more profound. It's a peculiar kind of peace, this acceptance of the unknown. It's like standing at the edge of the deepest ocean, knowing there are wonders beyond imagining in its depths, but understanding you can't plumb them all. You just stand there, breathe in the salt air, and let the sheer vastness wash over you. That's Ethelgard for me now, a monumental testament not just to what was, but to what is possible, to the incredible heights humanity might reach, and the equally incredible depths of mystery that can swallow it whole. It reminds us that our story, grand as we might think it, is but a fleeting whisper in the grand, echoing hall of time. Sometimes, when the moon is high and the house is still, I find myself drifting back to that plateau, to the feel of the wind whipping across those desolate yet strangely comforting structures. I hear the distant, imagined chime of their crystal cities, the murmur of a language lost to the ages, the soft footsteps of a people whose faces we can only conjure in our minds. They're not ghosts in the way we usually think of them, rattling chains or moaning through drafts. They're more like echoes, lingering vibrations in the very air, a song so quiet you have to strain every fiber of your being to catch even a single perfect note. And when you do, it doesn't frighten you. It fills you with a sense of wonder so vast it can make your heart ache in the most beautiful way. The world is full of such stories, isn't it? Places hidden just beyond the map's edge, whispers carried on the wind from long-forgotten days, mysteries that defy every neat explanation we try to build around them. Ethelgard is just one of the grandest, a shining example of how little we truly understand and how much majesty lies just beneath the surface of our everyday lives. It teaches us humility, and perhaps, more importantly, it teaches us to listen, not just with our ears, but with our hearts, to the quiet hum of existence that predates us and will surely outlast us. So, as the night deepens and the world outside settles into its own gentle hush, I invite you to let the lingering questions of Ethelgard drift away, not into forgetfulness, but into the quiet chamber of your imagination. You don't need to solve its riddle tonight. Some stories aren't meant to be fully understood, only felt and wondered about. They are there to expand the boundaries of our dreams, to remind us that the universe holds more magic and mystery than any single lifetime could ever hope to comprehend. And that in itself is a truly comforting thought, isn't it? Let the images of those silent, luminous ruins, of the vanished people and their incredible city, become a lullaby, a soft, eerie, beautiful hum that carries you to the edges of sleep. Rest now, with the understanding that beneath our world's ancient dust, countless wonders slumber, waiting only for your dreams to awaken them. And who knows what beautiful, untamed stories you might discover there, in the quiet, mysterious empire of your own slumbering mind. And just like that, the shadows of this lost empire fade back into the mists of time. Though its story may have been lost to history, its whispers will continue to echo in the quiet corners of our minds as we sleep. Thank you for joining us on this peaceful journey. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to subscribe and rest easy knowing there are countless more stories to uncover here at Twilight Tale. Until next time, sleep well and dream of history.